Hi everyone, this is Digitalk with Bimulus. The purpose of this podcast is to raise built environment digitalization awareness amongst industry, showcase Singapore's efforts on built environment digitalization such as BIM, IDD and IPD, and look at digitalization worldview through the lens of Singapore. Every month of the last Friday, we'll be inviting guests to discuss the latest BIM trends happening in the world. We look forward to you following our podcast. Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for joining us on this third installment of Digitalk with Bimulus. Today we will be discussing on some of the GRAPHISOFT features that we have on ArchiCAD. So we'll talk a bit on GDL, Param O, and then we will also talk a bit about the Python scripting, how we do it in ArchiCAD as well. So here we have this today is Akos and Suzsi. So Akos is one of our guest speaker, whom is stationed at in Hungary, and he is one of the professional services manager at GRAPHISOFT, and we have also here Sussi, who is a GDL Development Trainee at GRAPHISOFT. So we are honored to have invite them here today to speak a bit about the topics that we are going to go through. So I'll just hand it over to Sussi to elaborate a bit more about themselves. Sussi.
Hi, and thank you for the invite. I'm Sussi, but yes, you can call me Sussi. It's basically the same. I'm a trainee, as you've mentioned. I joined GRAPHISOFT 2 years ago as a student, and I learned to program GDL in here. So I'm studying architecture and working part-time as a GDL developer at GRAPHISOFT.
And Akos, maybe a bit of introduction of yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ákos, Karóczkai, and I'm leading the professional services team, a group of consultants who are developing trainings, doing consulting here at the GRAPHISOFT Budapest office. And I've been with GRAPHISOFT since 2014, and during my time here, I've been involved with many parametric design technologies that we've been developing from Rhino Grasshopper through Param O, through Python scripting, the Python API that we have currently for ArchiCAD. So I've been involved in that space, and that's what we will talk about today, I guess.
Yeah. So I've been through Akos teaching before. He was invited in Singapore at the GRAPHISOFT office. So I went through some of his training, which was we gained a lot of insight from Akos many years back.
That was in 2018. I guess. Quite
So,
a while back.
So just a few days ago, I was just going through my files and I saw the files that you shared in the training in 2018. So I started mucking around with the twisted tower, if you remembered.
Yeah.
So I tried on it again. So previously my laptop was able to use the Grasshopper and Rhino to drive the floor slab and the columns. But I got myself a new laptop, and then the moment because now the ArchiCAD Connect is done via Grasshopper, right? It's no longer.
Yeah. We've done some changes on the technology side.
So I was a bit lost
updating
at the very beginning. So with 26 is different. So when I click the Connect, and then it populated the model, but the ArchiCAD is okay, but GRAPHISOFT and the Rhino started to hang. So I think
it's been almost 5 years since those files, and they need some adjustment, and they should work okay.
Yeah, maybe after this I'll ask you how I can unhang it, because I'm struggling with my.
Absolutely.
Anyway, let's dive straight into our topic. So what is the could you explain a bit about the functions in relationship to modeling and documentation in ArchiCAD BIM environment in relationship to library part maker, Param O, GDL, Rhino and Grasshopper and Python scripting. Maybe with the library part maker, Suzsi, maybe you can explain a bit what that is in relationship with ArchiCAD as a documentation feature.
Yes, so to talk about library part maker, I have to mention GDL as well, because ArchiCAD offers you the option to create parametric objects, which are basically not just a model, the static thing that you have as it is, but you can, as a user, change its appearance. So if I have a chair, I can change its material, I can change its dimensions, I can change many other things on them. So this is what GDL is for. And Library Part Maker offers the user the option to create these parametric objects by modeling. And basically, it just puts those models together into one object. So with Library Part Maker, you have the option to create objects with detail levels. So I can have chair represented as a cube. I can have it represented as a simpler chair, and I can have it represented as an office chair. So with Library Part Maker, you also have different types of objects. So you have basic objects, you can create doors and windows, and so on. So this is basically an easier way to use GDL for your advantage.
And could I ask, GDL is basically a language of its own. It's also with textual scripting. What is the base of scripting? Is it C++ or is it, Python scripting, or what kind of language, or is it a language on its own?
GDL was created back when ArchiCAD was created, so it's more than a 30-year-old language, GDL. And it is based on BASIC, so it's not a modern programming language, but it was created for architects specifically. So it's based on BASIC, and it's made in a way that architects can learn it easier.
And
just one, sorry, Chris, just one note on the context of GDL. So as Zsuzsi mentioned, you can do different representations, different levels of details for objects, but GDL is capable for much more than that. It can through this you can create user interfaces, dialogues, things like that to have a complex system created that is an object, whether that's a chair, a table, a window, or door. But it's not just a list of parameters. You can create an entire interface for it with GDL. So it's a very comprehensive and complex solution.
Yes, the one I was talking about was Library Part Maker. So GDL is much more than that.
Yeah, I would suppose the complexity is when you have a set of living room furniture, for example. You have your sofas, and sofas can be, 3-arm sofas and become 2-arm sofas. And then you have the side sofas as well, and then plus the coffee table and all that. I suppose that's where the complexity is a bit higher than Library Part Maker. So
exactly.
Yeah. And when it you have Library Part Maker and you have GDL, and then how about Grasshopper, and Rhino in its relationship with modeling and the documentation in ArchiCAD?
Let me pick that up. But before we get into Rhino, Grasshopper, I just would like to paint a picture. Maybe share my screen for a second. And Chris, can you allow screen sharing?
Just give me a moment.
I'll narrate it for those who are listening in and cannot see the screen. But anyway, so in at Graphisoft or in the ecosystem around ArchiCAD, we have practically 3 different style of solutions, parametric tools or tool sets. One is the ones that are based on GDL. This is the Library Part Maker, Param O, or GDL, the programming language itself. We have an ecosystem around the Rhino, Grasshopper, ArchiCAD connections, and we have the Python-based and other like C++ APIs So we have a very, very extensive C++ API. We have a simplified Python API, and these are for different purposes. So the GDL, Param O library part maker part is for creating parametric objects, so like a smaller scale object creation. The Rhino Grasshopper area, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, is for rather building level parametric design, early design phase experimentation with shapes and forms, but it can go into later phases like design development and maybe even to producing construction documentations. And the APIs are, well, the C++ API can practically do anything inside ArchiCAD, so it's like a gateway to almost all the functionalities in ArchiCAD. While the Python-based API is mostly for automating certain workflows, primarily documentation, publishing kind of workflows. So we got these three partially overlapping areas, but specifically Rhino Grasshopper ArchiCAD is for early design phase, schematic design, design development to experiment with different shapes and forms for your building. So the whole story starts around 2014, 2015. I was in a lucky position. I joined the company around that time, where we started to collaborate with McNeil, the developers for Rhino and Grasshopper, and their users, they wanted to tap into BIM technologies like ArchiCAD. So at the end of the day, those people who design in Rhino and Grasshopper, they needed to submit, floor plans, sections, elevations, details. Either it's for a competition or for a project submission. They needed to produce those documentations, and ArchiCAD users, they wanted to start using Rhinos and Grasshoppers parametric capabilities and the free-form shapes and automations and trying out different design variations very rapidly. And that's why we connected the two solutions and created the Rhino Grasshopper ArchiCAD Live connection that ended up as the live connection. There were some initial phases that worked through GDL, as a matter of fact. So the initial prototypes, or not even prototypes, there were a product called what was it? I can't remember the name, but it was producing the Rhino file in GDL objects on the ArchiCAD side. And we ended up with the live connection, where people can drive ArchiCAD through Grasshopper, producing native BIM elements practically. But I guess your listeners are quite familiar with this technology, or this part of the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks for that detailed explanation of what Grasshopper and Rhino can do with ArchiCAD in terms of driving organic forms
on high level, in a nutshell.
So I just came from the Archi Intensive webinar just now. So I saw some of the capabilities of some of the firms, leveraging on Grasshopper, and the kind of organic shapes that it's able to do. It's really complex, and it really help with the workflow in terms of driving the design. So I also saw one this is Python scripting, where I thought was quite useful, where it's one of the BIM managers, and it has dived very deep into where he used it to manage attributes in as a library, and he used Python script to allow him to manage, and he very easily can just bring the attributes into so that he can manage it nicely for them. So I that's one of this
That's a pretty creative use for it, since that's a tough part of a BIM enabled office to manage all the attributes across many projects, many project files, and standardize those. And a Python API absolutely can do that, and many people are using it to drive this non-model part of ArchiCAD, like for example, attributes, but at the same time, it can, through this, the main idea is that you can write Python codes outside ArchiCAD, and you can run certain commands, and that will make changes to your project itself, whether that's the view or navigator content, like the number of views or the names of the views or what kind of folder structure you have in there, or attributes per se. So as I mentioned, we have an extensive C++ API that can drive the majority of ArchiCAD's functionalities, but learning C++ is a tough thing to do, and it's not an entry-level programming language, unlike Python, which has been gaining popularity in the past, I guess, 10 years or so. So that's, I would say now, Zsuzsi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the most popular programming languages. So that's why we have this connection, so that more people could tap into this part of driving ArchiCAD, not from the user interface side, but from the side gate, let's say. And this solution that we have, well, the most typical example that I can use is that you build up some kind of database in Excel. Let's say that's an easy interface to use. Like you use an Excel spreadsheet to build up a very extensive folder structure for your navigator with views and the settings of different views, like the scales, the layer combination, the graphic overrides, all the view settings. You can define it, something like the project index that we have in ArchiCAD, but as an outside sort of template database. And we can use this Python API to take an empty project and populate an entire navigator map, take views and place them automatically on layout, which is, currently, if you're not using any kind of API in ArchiCAD, that's a semi-manual thing to do. So when we were developing a batch of commands that can be run through Python, that was the initial thinking of how we can help our users automate these time-consuming and tedious tasks that, in a small project like a detached house, it's not a big deal. It can be done manually easily. But if you have a high-rise tower or a bunch of high-rise towers which are hot linked into each other, and it's a complex project, then it takes a lot of time. And that's where we wanted to provide a tool set to help our users save time and be more efficient.
Yeah, it's interesting to say that, and I do agree with your observation. I think Python, it's a much popular coding software as compared to the rest, for reason that I observed that there's more open source material that's available. So they're not just on YouTube videos, but there's a lot of dedicated websites on Python teaching people how to script certain commands that you want to drive certain activities or documentation or features within your ArchiCAD environment as well. So I guess with the help of open source, this will continue to deep dive everybody into a bit more proficient when it comes to managing the model with ArchiCAD. So now so much has been spoken about Param O, GDL, Grasshopper, and Python scripting. Is it possible for anyone to demonstrate on the screen and share with us what exactly Param O can do in terms of, like, say, for example, making a table? Not sure whether if you guys can share a bit of a feature of something like that, or the GDL as well.
Zsuzsi?
Can you do it? I don't think I have access. Yes, it's disabled for me.
Yeah, I will just sorry. Yeah, just give me a moment.
But
If
Ákos,
that's
can you
okay,
share?
I can share the screen and then Suszi can then talk about it. We prepared a couple of short clips to illustrate some of these.
Hold on. Okay, I think I managed. Okay, Susie, you can share your screen now.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Just a second. But I will narrate it for those who are just listening. Too, I guess. Okay, so this is a video prepared by Vimal in Param O. So it's it's sped up a bit, but you can see that in Param O you have the option to create these so-called nodes that can be geometric shapes or parametric length or something like that, and you create these nodes and create a visual connection between them, and it makes the object itself. So basically it's much more fun than just coding and writing the code. And Param O has been developed by Graphisoft, so it's our own solution, but it can be used for simpler objects. But I've seen many interesting projects with Param O, so you have to play around with it for a few minutes and then you get the hang of it, and it's really just playing around with it, because we also have materials. Correct me, Ákos, if I'm wrong, but I think we have materials on Param O on the Graphisoft Learn site, and you can basically use those materials to learn it. And it's I think it doesn't take more than a day to be really good at Param O.
Yeah, that's right. We have a course on it, so you can get started on the Graphisoft Learn.
The website actually has quite a bit of materials on teaching the fundamentals of Param O, and I think it's quite comprehensive. And I do agree that it takes very little time for you to learn, to learn it. But looking at it, it's more of like a visual scripting. It's quite similar to what Grasshopper is doing. So may I ask what's the difference between the two, since both is actually visual scripting? Because in terms of things like I would suppose perhaps in the context of using Param is to make simple BIM objects a bit easier. That's more accessible than using GDL, right? Because GDL you need to have some textual scripting knowledge before you can actually do. So this actually helps you to make very simple BIM objects in a much quicker way, right? So after all, we as architects or as engineers, we are not trained in scripting. So visual scripting does helps us a bit when we try to make objects in ArchiCAD environment. So am I correct to assume the difference is that for Param is more for simple objects, whereas Grasshopper is more for complex manipulation of forms? Am I correct to assume that?
In a nutshell, yeah. Go ahead, Sussi.
Yes. Well, Param O was created basically. So when you are using Param O, you are creating a GDL script. So if you save the object and open it, you will see that it's a GSM file that is GDL based. It's not like when someone scripts an object. So the script is not going to be as perfect as it would be if you would script it, but basically it's a visual way to create the GDL code. And with Grasshopper, as Ákos mentioned, it's more for building design and creating those bigger forms, and GDL and Param O is more for objects, smaller things. But I've seen facades or something like that created with Param O, so it can be used for both. I think it's up to the user. So it's creative process, just like designing a building itself. So
Yeah, if you were to design a building in Param O, it's possible, but it's less flexible. So if you want to change something, the layout of the floor plan or something like that, it takes a lot of effort. While doing the same thing with Grasshopper, it's a relatively easy thing to do. You just switch a contour or change a slider to have a taller building or something like that. So
Yeah.
and Param O, in my view, is a gateway to GDL. So you kind of have to learn a little bit how the thought process behind GDL works. So it's like a middle step. So we got library part maker where you don't need to know any logic. You model 3 versions of the same thing, like whether that's a chair or a door or a window, and you combine those things into one object. In Param O, in a visual way, which is very appealing to architects and designers, and easy to learn, you can get started with the thinking of GDL, but you don't need to know the coding or the scripting per se. And it's a very popular interface, I would say. And many software solutions have this. In rendering solutions, there is node-based material creators or material editors. So it's not just for building design. It's for many different solutions. It's available. And of course, GDL is the most capable, but the most time-consuming or most difficult to learn. You have to learn a new language practically.
Yes, but what I want to point out, because it's not obvious at first, but when you create a GDL object with coding, you create the 3D representation, you create a 2D representation. So those two are separate things, but you have to keep them aligned. And when you are creating a Param O object, you are just creating the 3D and it is projected to the floor plan. So with GDL coding, you have more flexibility, so you can create more detailed representations of those objects. So this is how it works in BIM. So this is why we need GDL to have these exact representations of a door, for example, because maybe the projected. Yes. So yes, we need to have this option to create them separately.
I see. All right. So now we have a better understanding of the differences between the 3. So I guess GDL allows you to determine your detail level when you are modeling it on a 2D condition. Whereas Param O, it's more of you trying to put everything together on the 3D. In the 3D view, it's similar to Library Part Maker, but then again, Library Part Maker is sort of like a mini federation of a BIM object of many parts assembled
something
together.
Like that, yeah.
So, well, I guess at the end of the day, it depends on the user, which is a better workflow, to get the project going in terms of the productivity and the efficiency of producing the drawing at the end of the day. So thanks for that elaborate explanation. Now, Akos, is it possible for you to show us something? To look at Rhino and Grasshopper in ArchiCAD environment. I'll just make you
a couple of videos prepared.
Yep.
Okey-doke. So.
Wow, the script.
And it's a fairly simple script. So what you can see on the screen, I'm just telling this for the listeners, is a high-rise tower, but only defined with contours of the slabs, contours of the core, the structural cores, walls, and a couple of axis lines for the columns. And it's a fairly simple code. And the good thing about connecting Rhino Grasshopper with ArchiCAD is that you don't need to go into elaborate Grasshopper codes, because you only need reference lines from which we can create native BIM elements, where the details, the slab thickness, the slab material, IDs, layers, metadata is coming through the connection, and we don't need to go in and and detail out the model on the Rhino Grasshopper side. So it's less time practically, and connecting these Grasshopper parts with the ArchiCAD dedicated ArchiCAD design nodes, we can easily generate BIM elements from which we have the advantage of later on creating the floor plan sections, elevation, and ArchiCAD on the ArchiCAD side fairly easily and quickly, presuming that the practice has a good template put together, because that's the strength of ArchiCAD. So besides that, for ArchiCAD users, the benefit is that they can create fairly complex geometries that would take a lot of time modeling manually, like a twisted building with changing angled columns. Doing that manually, it's a lot of time. But with the connection, it's fairly easy, and you can change your design significantly by, let's say, changing the floor plan contour of the building and synchronizing all of this into ArchiCAD to get a completely different shape building. It takes a few seconds, or at least in the early design phase, when you have low complexity of the model. So in this case, in the video, we generated about a few thousand ArchiCAD elements in, I don't know, 5-10 seconds for the entire building. That takes a lot of time manually. And this way you can do rapid prototyping, you can do quick evaluations, because we have exact measurements of the BIM elements on the ArchiCAD side. We can see the floor plan areas for each story. We can see volumes, we can see quantity takeoffs, and we can create schedules fairly easily and get feedback in numbers very, very quickly as well, in a familiar interface or familiar environment for architects, and they can make informed design decisions, and they can fairly quickly adjust their design. So this is one workflow where we take stuff from Rhino and Grasshopper and produce a BIM design in ArchiCAD, but the connection is a two-way thing. So we can start in ArchiCAD and bring geometry data and information to the Grasshopper side to evaluate the design, or to use it to further design additional elements in ArchiCAD. So what I have here is a facade with a couple of balcony slabs manually modeled, and I would like to generate a cladding, a random colored cladding on the facade. And again, manually, that's a lot of work. So I can bring in the contours of the slab, the balcony slabs, into Grasshopper, where it's fairly easy to create such randomized patterns like a facade cladding, and I can generate either railings for the balconies fairly easily. In this case, it's made out of walls and some beams, but at the same time, I can generate this cladding. And if I change the original geometry, that's the balcony slabs, this is synchronized over to Grasshopper, where the definition updates, and then the position of the cladding is updated and synchronized. So or with this, we can try out different design variations, different paneling patterns, different colors, different ratios of colors. So I always say this example that we have a huge facade with lots of different randomized colors, and the client says that I want less or more yellow, and in Grasshopper it's easy to change a slider. I want, instead of 50% yellow, I want 25% yellow, and it's updating the whole thing. While doing that manually, again, takes, I don't know, for 2 interns, 3 interns in an architectural office, I don't know, a week or so to remodel the whole facade. So it's a huge time saver. And then again, whatever we produce on ArchiCAD side, it's easy to document it, dimension it, label it automatically, produce drawings, produce an IFC and export it to a consultant in facade design that might be relevant, that you have a proposal as a designer, you propose a facade design, and you can easily get it to other facade design consultants, either in the Grasshopper code or just as an IFC file. So, I would say it enhances collaboration as well.
Yeah.
So, there is this two-way thing.
Looking at the kind of options that you have as the example that you're shown, I would suppose you can do design options very quickly for your clients, and most often than not, clients can be quite they might want to change their design at a moment's notice. So
it can be almost real time in certain situations if it's built up correctly, if you think ahead with that in mind.
And then you can almost do this in real time, right? Because you have the slider, and all you need to do is just adjust the color, adjust the patterns, adjust the randomization of where the balcony is and where the railing is. What is funny is that when I saw the twisted model and the balcony, it bring back some memories that I had with you, Akos, in 2018. You actually came to Singapore. And so some flashback there, quite interesting, and we actually learned a lot during those classes. We hope you can come back to Singapore again.
Hopefully, and in Singapore, it's very relevant to work with large scale buildings where any minor change brings a lot of work. If you change a small part of the design, you have to do it not even necessarily on just one building, but if you're designing an entire plot, then on 5, 6, 7, 10 other buildings, and doing this even in a semi-automated way, it can be reduce the work from weeks to days, or from days to 2 hours in certain situations.
And may I know, when it comes to learning Grasshopper, and I know Param O, there's quite a bit of substantial materials that it's on the Graphisoft website, but on Grasshopper and Rhino, if a user wish to to get to the level of that kind of experience, visual coder with Grasshopper, where can we actually get to those materials to learn to get to hone in our skills?
Right. So there's a whole bunch of training materials available online. YouTube is always a good source of information, but I would like to highlight the Grasshopper forums, because it's a very supportive community. I did when I was learning how to use Rhino and Grasshopper together. I was digging into the forums, and there were people uploading partial Grasshopper codes and definitions to the forum, and they described their goals. And the community was very supportive. They proposed different approaches. Some people downloaded the code and they uploaded a different version that solved the actual problem of the original person's question. So I would really highlight the forum, but YouTube is a really good way to go to learn Rhino and Grasshopper itself. And when it comes to the connection to ArchiCAD, very soon we're going to release a course on it on the Graphisoft Learn portal, so it will be available there. But once you know Rhino and Grasshopper, it's pretty straightforward to have any other software connection, not just ArchiCAD. Of course, you have to be aware of what you can do in ArchiCAD. It's like if you have a geometry in Grasshopper, or like some reference lines or curves, you have to know whether that's going to end up as a column or a beam, or if you want to create a slanted wall or a slab or roof or what it is. So you have to be able to make this pairing, that what kind of geometry you have and what kind of model element will that end up in ArchiCAD. So
how long did
that
it take
needs a little bit of
for you to, become proficient at it? Did it take a year or 6 months by going?
Well, for me, it was a longer journey because I did it on the learning on the side. So, but I would say in a few months, 1 to 3 months, if somebody is dedicated, they can get very proficient. So the entry level is very low, so you can get started with Rhino and Grasshopper very easily. In a few hours, you can create BIM models on ArchiCAD. But the interesting part of this whole parametric design is the let's say prototyping. When you have a problem and you have to make very accurate modeling or connections between geometries, that's where it goes a little bit towards scripting or coding. You have to know how Grasshopper works in the background. You have to know how ArchiCAD works in the background. But in a few months, I think somebody can be very proficient connecting these things.
And we know that it's visual scripting that with all the different nodes that actually drives certain outcome in the ArchiCAD environment. So but I do see some more advanced users actually code with Python, and they code it inside the Grasshopper environment. How is it that when it's already there's already available nodes that is inside the Grasshopper environment, why do you still need to do something with the Python scripting in the Grasshopper environment? Could someone explain?
So you mean the Python scripting in Grasshopper versus the Python scripting in ArchiCAD, right?
Yeah, you can phrase that question in that way. Yeah.
Well, I think the two has very different purposes. So why people code in Grasshopper, make their dedicated little boxes to perform very specific tasks, or either very specific or a very generic task, like distributing things along a certain geometry that to fit their particular need. That's might not be even connected to ArchiCAD. So they create their own boxes to perform a certain task, or I don't know. Yeah, that came to mind, to distribute certain geometries in a system that cannot be described very easily, like not along a line or along a circle in a uniform distance. But what the Python coding on the ArchiCAD side allows people is to automate ArchiCAD's functionalities. And if somebody codes on Grasshopper side, that's primarily either creating geometry or organizing the data to generate some geometry. Simplified. But the two Python gateways, let's say, they have totally different purposes. Ours is for automating workflows. Yeah.
And am I correct to say that if you were to code Python in Grasshopper, sometimes it's because your script can go quite complex and can go the term is spaghettify, and then sometimes you get lost. So sometimes you need to code in Python is to compress certain by the time you do all your wires and the connection, you get so much. You just try to compress that so to make it simpler. Am I correct to assume that it's about simplification as well when you do it?
Absolutely, simplification and performance, I would say, because if you have a very huge, as you said, spaghetti code, it can get slow. So if you start off with a circle and you build up an entire city out of that circle, and you change the radius of the circle, then it will, even in Grasshopper, it will take quite a long time to change the entire code. And in Grasshopper, you can by default, even without scripting, you can take a bunch of boxes and combine it into one simple one. So just for interface simplification, you don't need to code, but to increase the performance of the algorithm, that's where people come in and do a little bit of Python scripting, because the nodes are broken down into very elementary operations like addition, subtraction, distributions, and I guess it's defined for user experience, or it's optimized for user experience. But if you have a very complex system, then it can get slow, and that's when you need to go in and start optimizing on the code level, or on the Python code level, I mean.
Okay. But when we are modeling in terms of workflow, you know, since you and Sussi has been such experienced users for for quite a while now. So when you're modeling, what are the choices that you make? Do you model straight directly in ArchiCAD, or do you because of some organic forms that you need to do, that's why you are using Grasshopper? You know, what are the decisions that actually drive you at the end of the day to say that I'm using this method, this workflow for this particular project? How do you make that decision?
I think that needs to be taken before the project is started, and it depends on the office setup. How many people can do Grasshopper? How many people can you code in Param O, or how many can use the library part maker? That primarily decides which tool do you use. I went into, when I was working a lot with Rhino and Grasshopper, I could get into a spiral and look at every problem, like how can I solve this with Rhino and Grasshopper? And majority of the problems you can, but maybe you shouldn't. So, you know, if you're a hammer, you start to look at everything as nails, kind of scenario. I think it needs a BIM coordinators, BIM managers level thinking to define what are the problems throughout the design process, and where do we need to touch in which design phase or which design problem. We need to take a look at these different tools. So by default, I would, you know, just on a high level, I would break it down by design phase. The early design phase, you use Rhino and Grasshopper, and as the design gets more detailed and detailed, you touch these other solutions like GDL, Library Part Maker, Param O. Towards the end of the process, you might want to automate certain workflows with the Python and API. But Sussi, if you can chime in, feel free. What do you think of these? When to choose which tool? Kind of topic.
I think you are correct with the BIM manager part. So it's I think not up to the individual architects in a firm to decide when to use a tool, but to plan out the whole phase of the building design and just think about what we will need for that. So sometimes you will have architects in your own firm to do, you know, specific GDL objects, but sometimes you have to think about, you know, outsourcing something because you have a specific need. You have to, I don't know, what comes to my mind is renovation, because with renovation you have, you know, newer and newer types of windows and doors that you have to use in your building. So sometimes you have to use Library Part Maker for that, but you have to think about these things before starting the whole design, because you know, it takes time to create an object, for example. It takes time to master these tools, so you have to think before getting to that point.
And the purpose,
I think that's...
You gave me a very good idea, Sussi, about this renovation project. So you do a renovation project, you receive a point cloud, let's say, and you start remodeling the building. And there's a very detailed, very intricate window frame. And, you know, you can model that with the library part maker, you can model that with a Param O. It takes longer time, and you can create an entire GDL object from scratch just to have that model. But what do you need to do with that window? You just need to represent it. You need to redesign it. You need to, remove it and place a completely different window in its place. So we need to make this kind of decisions when determining what kind of tool are we using, and who does that? Is it in the office? If we're gonna need to have a very detailed, functioning, openable version of that window, probably we should hire someone external out of the. I'm talking as a designer, office, BIM manager, let's say. Maybe we hire someone to code that GDL object, and we don't spend our time on doing that. So you have to consider these factors as well.
Yeah, I think I suppose the BIM execution plan will then have to come in at the very beginning before the project gets executed.
Oh yes.
To determine the level of detail. And sometimes it's mostly driven by the owners. They could have a portfolio of buildings and they want certain standards, and they buy from certain suppliers or manufacturers to operate and maintain their building. So that will also have some influence on how the model will be modeled in terms of its LOD, how it's being defined at the different phases in the life cycle of the project as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to consider the stakeholders. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like,
I think everybody.
If you do something with Grasshopper, then will anybody else use that Grasshopper? Is it the only time when you're using the Grasshopper code, or there's going to be a next project where you can utilize it? And if it's worth to invest resources to develop such a code, let's say, is it the one time use only, or it's a repetitive thing?
The Grasshopper code will work to the DD stage, the design development stage, and then that's where it gets cut off completely, the project, because that's where you start your documentation for your tender drawings.
Most of the time, yeah.
So by that time, I think, well, in the ideal world, the client will have already frozen the design processes.
In an ideal world, yes.
Yeah, ideal world. Okay, so it's been fun. Time passes us real quick. It's coming 10 minutes to an hour since we started. So really thank you, Akos and Suzsi, for joining us in this session, giving us insight as to what Param can do, what GDL can do, what library part maker. Oh, sorry, it's library part maker first, then Param, then GDL, then followed by Python scripting. I know Grasshopper, and then Python scripting. Yeah, so in that order. So thank you very much for coming on this third installment on Digitalk with Bimulus. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone here has gained an insight as to what all this four can do for us in the GRAPHISOFT environment. So any more things would you guys like to add before we end today's conversation?
I think mine is just as a student, I just want to say, because we've only talked about, firms, architecture firms, but as a student, what I want to tell the people listening is that you should try these tools, and you should use these modern tools in your work, because it can make you more valuable as an architect. So you will be easier to get hired. So I think I just want to say that keep learning, and use what we offer with ArchiCAD.
Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, totally agree.
Thank you for having us.
We learned a lot from
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on the session on Digitalk with Bimulus. We hope you have gained some insights from the episode and hope you could follow us in our next episode again. Thank you and goodbye.